we tend to do what we won't allow our customers in management to do. If we ask them why they're doing something, and they say, we're told to do it. We've always done it that way. It's in the book. We won't accept that, right? There has to be a good reason. But yet, auditors are doing things the way they have been doing them without really thinking about, is this the best way to do something?
This episode is brought to you by Green Skies Analytics, an audit analytics service provider that works with internal audit departments that have data analysts and are still frustrated with trying to make analytics actually work, aren't getting the expected ROI, who can't break through the communication barrier between the analysts and the audit team, and those that need experienced direction for an audit analytics strategy and process. Those that feel like they've wasted time and money on trainings, aren't getting the value they want, not prioritizing the highest risk areas for the organizations, or have projects that seemingly never get completed. Do you deal with any of that? If you do, go to the show notes of this episode and click the Green Skies Analytics link, or go to greenskiesanalytics.com to schedule a call and understand how Green Skies Analytics makes analytics actually work for internal audit. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Audit Podcast. I'm your host, Trent Russell, and today on the show we have Norman Marks, who I feel like doesn't really need an introduction. We don't typically bring the same guest back more than once, just to try to get as much variety as possible, but Norman, I think this is his fourth time on the show, and that really speaks to his level of thought leadership and how much respect I have for his opinion. And if you aren't familiar, I cannot recommend enough. Like the amount of people who will reach out to me and go, I'm getting back into internal audit, or I'm looking to get into internal audit, or how do I grow as an internal auditor, something, anything along those lines. I tell every single one of them, subscribe to Norman's blog, subscribe to Richard's blog, get Richard's books, get Norman's book. Especially like if you're in a SOX world, go get his book on SOX. Some of his audit books also probably have had more impact on me than anything else that I've read or any other kind of source. So we do ask Norman at some point, like, where do you go? Where should we go? What are other really good resources? So he does mention some of those also, but those kind of top the list for me. So with that said, Richard Chambers does do this annual, I think he's done it 5 years in a row now, top 12-ish thought leaders in internal audit. And Norman has been on the list every single year, as well as Hal Guerin. So I can't recommend enough following those two folks. And then also it basically says each time that if there were a thought leader in this space, it would be Norman. So again, just go search Norman Marks' blog, subscribe. They're relatively short. There's 1 to 2 a week. The 15 maybe minutes you're going to spend a week is going to add a ton of value to what you do as an auditor. And then seriously, your stakeholders are going to feel it too, as your mindset starts to potentially change depending on where you are with that right now. With all that said, a couple of things we wanted to hit on was, so Norman was a CAE. And so we want to talk about what he saw as his most important task as a CAE. Like, we can figure out what the one thing is that we should all be doing. If you are a CAE or aspiring CAE, I think that can add a ton of value to always come back to that one thing. This is the one thing I need to make sure that I'm doing. So we wanted to get Norman's perspective on that. And then we're seeing and hearing a lot of audit departments are going, organizationally, revenue's growing, but that's not being reflected in our budget increases. And so those aren't easy conversations for a lot of people to have, to ask for more budget. But it's part of the role. It's part of the job responsibility. If you are leading your audit function or any other function, you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to get the resources to be more effective and to be more efficient. So we wanted to get Norman's thoughts on basically strategies, approaches, guidance on how to get more budget for what it is that you need. So I'd highly recommend checking that out. And then we just have it's really conversational with Norman. He's one of the few people that goes, you don't need to send me the questions in advance. I don't need to hear the recording afterwards. It's totally fine. Like, just you come on, ask me the questions and I'll answer. So there's not a ton of structure, but that doesn't mean that there's not a ton of value in listening to this one. Well, that's it. Here we go. I believe you were the first person that we asked this question to, probably early 2024, maybe it might have even been late 2023 last year. But now that you're back, We have also continued to ask that of everyone. So that question being, what is either in your internet browsing history or your ChatGPT, Llama, Claude, whatever, if you happen to use an LLM, what's in that history? What have you been looking into lately?
Thank you, Trent, and good to be with you again. Yeah, I've been doing a number of different things. Um, I encourage everybody. I've been playing a little bit with ChatGPT and the other products from Microsoft and Google and so on. And some of it is in connection with the book I'm writing right now. I'm in the middle of writing a new book on how to audit risk management, and I've been using the power of Google and the AI machines to tell me what other people are saying about it. For example, I found out that the last book I could find either on Amazon or in the IIA library on how to audit risk management was in 2013, which is somewhat surprising when you think about it. That here we are with an issue and a need, which I think is very important, and yet nobody has written a book about it in such a long time. So I've been doing that. I've also been curious about my ancestry, and there's my great great grandfather appears to have changed his name when he came over from Germany, and I've never been able to find out why. So started going back and rechecking all the research that I did when I put that part of my chart together. I've got over 2,000 people in my chart right now, my ancestry chart, and it's always interesting to see the various times when something odd happened. So there is that. Also, I just wrote a provocative piece on Facebook about the situation in Israel, and I was looking up some of because I'm Jewish, some of the Jewish beliefs in terms of love thy neighbor and what we should be doing. So various things. I use all of these other interesting tools from time to time. One of the things which I encourage people to do is to take a tool like ChatGPT, which happens to be the first one I used, and ask it who you are. And you'll probably find that it's about 90 some percent accurate. Then ask it again, because it'll change it. It won't give you the same bio, but it'll give you a little bit different, and it'll start bringing in things which are actually inaccuracies, and it'll start exaggerating. And then you ask it a third time, and now it's starting to become totally unreliable. Curiously, I did a webinar just last week, and the person introducing me, it was clearly that he had done the bio using ChatGPT. So I thought it was rather interesting. And what this is telling me is that these are troubling times in a way, because people are using these tools and there's no real assurance that they're accurate. And it's very, very difficult, because I used, in my last blog, I think, 4 different engines to say what risk was, and only one of them gave sources. So you can't even double check where it's coming, the information is coming from. Anyway, this is all interesting, and different. I look at different things over time.
I didn't know about the book, but I told you off air shortly before we started recording that usually there is a new book that you have. We usually take some notes from it and ask questions around that. I don't want to go into it too deep. It sounded like you said you were like about halfway through. Do you have any idea when we could expect that, though?
Oh, it'll be 2025, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We'll keep an eye out on it. I tell people all the time, and I told you this earlier also, but occasionally someone will reach out and say something to the effect of, hey, I'm getting back into audit, or I want to get into audit, or I'm interested in that. Where should I start? And I always tell them, subscribe to all of Norman's blogs, read his books, especially depending on where you are. Like if you're doing SOX, read the SOX book. If not, Well, I would recommend the other also, or the others, but then also you, and then I'd say the same thing about Richard, like just subscribe to his
Right.
blog, read his books, and like you'll be good to go if you just have those two sources, especially as often as you put out blogs to take those in and read those, and you'll be above, I would say, most folks if they do that. So, all right, looking forward to that then. Something else
Thank you,
we've
Jim.
been asking is, and maybe this is more so as your time as a CAE, but it's totally fine if maybe your perspective has changed. This is the hard-hitting stuff that we do on the Audit podcast. Emojis in emails, yes or no?
No,
Okay.
but but but
Look at you like that's a
emoji,
dumb question. No.
emoji. Actually, I don't hardly ever use emojis. I use GIFs and videos because they're much more expressive. They're more amusing and they get more of a reaction. An emoji is dated.
Yeah.
You
No,
know
no.
what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe a thumbs up sometimes, or a namaste.
Yeah.
But an emoji in an email, no. If it's an email, I don't think that's as respectful as actually putting some words in a text.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, it's just been, I read that question somewhere and I went, yeah, I wonder. And I almost wondered generationally if there's a difference also, or medium. So if it's email, it's kind of like, no, nothing really there, but a LinkedIn message, a little less, maybe a little bit more casual, throw it in there, a
Yes.
text message, something like that. So anyway, again, that's just kind of a goofy question we've been asking folks. All right. So back to when you were a CAE, what was your most important task as a CAE? And is it something that you did every single day?
My most important task is something that I did something towards every single day. So I felt that my job was to do what I could to help the organization be successful. That's the underlying theme to my role there. I was a member of the management team, also in many ways a secretary of the audit committee of the board. So I worked with them as well and was very conscious of my obligation to help them be successful in their job of governance and oversight of what management was doing. Having said that, the way in which I would typically make a contribution was providing, as we say in the core principles, the assurance, advice, and insight that management needs on the more significant risks so that they can be successful. Now, I would work towards an opinion at the end of the year, which we actually, when I was with one of the IIA committees, we actually wrote some guidance on how to do this. But I would actually provide a formal opinion on the system of internal control overall. Well, it was based upon the work that I had done over the year, both formal and informal, because by just being present, you get a feel for the adequacy of internal controls, even beyond what you do in the audits, in the formal audit. So it's everything that I was involved in, or my team was involved in over the year, once a year, typically at the same time as I'm putting together my plan and proposing my budget for the next year, I'll provide an opinion on internal controls. And I might have to segment that if needed, but that was my core mission, if you like, was to help them sleep at night, knowing that the internal controls are effective. It's reasonable assurance that they are effective in managing the more significant risks to the organization, which is of course what they're concerned with.
Did you quantify those in some way, or was it more, or maybe even how did you communicate that? Might be a better question.
Well, first of all, and this is something that not a lot of people seem to appreciate or talk about, which is that I'm entitled to my professional opinion. And I think that when I'm providing that assurance, when I'm providing that report, I'm giving my professional opinion, which hopefully they respect because they hired me and they continue to keep me in the job of Vice President of Internal Audit, to be able to assess whether those controls and processes provide that reasonable assurance that the risks to objectives are being managed properly. So I don't, in terms of quantifying the risk, that's a different topic. But overall, it's almost as if I was putting myself in their shoes and saying, would I be happy with this system of internal controls? Okay, because you can't have perfect internal controls. For example, recently I wrote about the risk when I was at the refining company, oil refining company. We had processing units, and if one of the employees didn't follow safety protocols, they could not only injure themselves, but they could cause a fire and explosion and injure or even kill themselves and many others. They could also have a devastating impact on the community. So how do you have internal controls over that? Well, you have the protocol, you have training, you have some level of supervision, but if you want to go further, you need to have somebody watching them. So now you're starting to double the size of the workforce, and maybe you need cameras, or maybe you need a third person to be monitoring the second person who's monitoring the first one. At some point, there's a level of investment that is not reasonable to take. So it's always, I think, a judgment call. It's much an art as a science in terms of determining what is reasonable assurance. And that was actually sometimes the challenge, is how much risk should management be taking? Risk of the control failing, risk that therefore there's going to be a serious issue to the organization. But it comes down to this word which the external auditors have to use because the PCAOB and SEC require, but you don't hear a lot of internal auditors talking about this word, judgment. And I think we should be able to use our judgment, our professional judgment, maybe have some basis, but let's not go overboard in terms of finding evidence to support our professional judgment.
The reason I laughed when you said judgment, when I first started an external audit, we used to just be able to document things away by going, this was the line. Based on my professional judgment, or based on auditor judgment, this is not an exception. And that was sufficient for a little bit. And then, we had basically the guidance came down and they went, well, you have to explain what that judgment is. And then also,
Right.
Me, I was like, they're like, you've been doing this job for 6 months. You have no judgment of like, your judgment doesn't really count because you have none to apply. And I was like, yeah, I barely know what a control is at this point. So anyway, that's I laughed. I don't know who saw it or maybe heard it, but when you said judgment, I laughed because I distinctly remember constantly going, based on internal audit or audit judgment, X, Y, Z. And then they went, well, you have to explain what that judgment is.
So as an extension of my thoughts there, as the head of internal audit, as the vice president, as a member of the management team, I was always on the lookout of where can we find opportunity to add value by sharing our insight. So, for example, at one of my companies, Maxstore, we were starting to have a lot of profit issues. And we were having some issues in terms of the design of a next generation product, which is going to be cost effective in the market. And there were a number of underlying issues that I was able to see and listen to and talk to management about in terms of prior investments that had been made into where we did our manufacturing. So we were actually manufacturing a core part of the disk drives that we were making in Northern California, whereas our competitors were doing it in Thailand and China. Well, that is not really a recipe for success in the long term. So one of the things I was doing was talking to management, both financial and operational, about how we can change that. There was also another division that seemed to be struggling to remain profitable. So I just went in almost like a consultant to see if I could find efficiencies. Now, that's not an audit. I'm not sure it's an advisory service. I'm not sure what it is. But as the head of internal audit, I saw, as like I said, my mission, my purpose there was to help them be successful and provide assurance that those objectives that they are measuring the success of the organization against would be achieved. And so while I would spend most of my time on the formal audit side, I and many of my people, I gave them the freedom to do more and encouraged them to do more.
And so is this just, did you have a process to follow to add value, or is it, hey, I saw something and now I'm curious about this, I'm going to go figure it out? Like where you saw the area that was struggling with profits, did you come across that, or did you do some kind of routine assessment to some degree, or did you just catch wind of it and go, oh, well, let me go take a look at that then?
These things come up and all the time. And it's just a matter of recognizing whether this is something where we can add value as an opportunity. One of my favorite stories, Trent, is, and you may have read this in my books, is at the Tosco Marketing Company, where we operated 6,000 convenience stores. I used to, when I was in Phoenix, I used to attend the CEO's executive team meeting. And in one of those, he asked the head of marketing, how are we doing with our advertising campaign? Because every year we would try to come up with something that we could really push and say, this is why you need to come into one of our Circle K stores instead of a 7-Eleven or another gas station convenience store. And the previous year, we'd had this wonderful coffee, which was rated in the local city magazines as the best. But this year, the marketing campaign was delayed. And so the VP said that they couldn't find anything to talk about. And that did not satisfy the CEO, because he said, well, without that, how are we going to drive revenue? All of our competitors are saying something unique and interesting. We've got to say more than come and visit our stores, we're nice people. And he basically said that they couldn't think of anything. They'd run out of ideas. So after the meeting, I went up to the CEO's office and said, this seems like a failure of imagination, a failure of creativity. And there's a science to stimulating thinking and creative ideas. And I'd read about that several years ago, because I used to subscribe to the American Management Association magazines, and I'm always trying to extend my mind by reading things like Fast Company. I encourage everybody to read Fast Company, and anything else which is talking about how people are doing things differently. And TED Talks is another great way of learning about something else. And then, as in this case, I was able to say, there's something here. So I said to the CEO, how about I do an audit of creativity in this area? And he looked at me as if I was crazy, which I probably am.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds crazy.
and he said, go for it. So I went off and spoke to the head of marketing, and he said that they couldn't think of it. I said, have you talked to the people in the stores? Because the people in the stores are the people who are in the trenches. They are really customer facing. They are dealing with customers, and they know what customers want, which may vary from region to region. But they know about trends in customer sentiment and customer designs, what customers ask about, for example, what they say they're looking for. And he said, no. I said, why not? And he said, because 2 or 3 years ago, we gave them an opportunity to come up with ideas, and we spent a lot of money on their ideas, and it went nowhere, so we don't trust them anymore. So I went and started talking to some of the people in the field operations side, some of the managers I've spoken to, They said, yes, we can do this or we can do that. And I went back to the marketing manager and he said, oh, those are interesting ideas. Maybe we should reinstate that program. And I went back to the CEO and said, this is an internal controls failure. If you think about it. And they were able to get the marketing campaign going. It was simply something that somebody, he came up in a meeting. And there are many situations like that where we just have to be on the lookout to see something. If there's a problem out there, can we help?
I want to get to this. Well, let's just go ahead and cover it because I mentioned earlier, folks reach out and I go read Norman's stuff, read Richard's stuff, and some other folks to follow and things like that. But you mentioned Fast Company. What are the other areas that you would recommend folks look into, other resources?
The biggest resource, Trent, is talk to the people in the trenches. Okay.
That was a good segue. That was a really good segue. Previous story.
Go talk to people in the trenches. Go talk to, and this is what I did. Once a month or so, I would actually go out with one of the field managers for the convenience store business, and I would do a ride around with him on his normal route because he would visit 2 or 3 stores every day, and I would go with him. And in the car, I would ask him questions about the business, not internal controls, not risk. I'd ask him questions about the business and the challenges he has. One of his favorite ones was working with corporate and the obstacles and opportunities there. And then we would go to a store and I would have the same opportunity to talk to the store managers. And some of the stories, I tell you, were just amazing, almost unbelievable. And we don't have time for all of those, but getting out and talking to people, but there's a great management consultant out there who was asked, how do you find out what's going on in the business? He said, ask the janitor. Because the janitor may be able to hear a lot of what's going on. So go into the cafeteria, meet people everywhere, and learn from them about the business. And frankly, that is the greatest resource, which I think few people, and it's generally free, which people don't take full advantage of. Oh, it's Tom Peters. Yeah.
And speaking of free, this is a question I've been curious about because I don't really hear a lot of folks talk about it. And it is obviously very important. And I think it's just because it's money, it's budget, it's salesy. And so it feels icky or dirty or sleazy, maybe is the best way to put it. But when you, as a CAE, need resources to effectively do your job, you have to get more monetary budget. I always try to differentiate between an hourly budget and a monetary budget because there's differences, but I feel like a lot of times we talk budget and everybody thinks monetarily. And hopefully you have a story to share. I would think so. If anything, you don't have a lack of stories to share. But is there a story you can share where, hey, I needed XYZ budget wise. Initially, I got pushback, and this is how I got it. I feel like there's a lot of CAEs that maybe even on the first go around, they go, well, we didn't get it, so I guess we're done with this and we can never do it. But anything that you feel like you could share with CAEs, and even I know when I was a full-time data analyst, I had to basically make the use case or make the proposal for, I need this automation software to solve XYZ problem. This is the benefit that we're going to get from that, et cetera. Fortunately, it wasn't super expensive, so I didn't have to put on a full dog and pony show. But with that said, is there some guidance, some advice, stories, something like that you can share to help those CAEs that maybe struggle with that?
Well, I think, Trent, your story about data analytics needing software and needing to build a use case is the foundation. And I did something similar. It sounds very different, but it's essentially the same thing, which is that every year I would, except for my first year, every year I would put together, after doing the risk assessment, a schedule that showed all the audits that I felt were necessary in order to address the more significant risks. And I would prioritize them in terms of the level of risk or value that they were addressing. Because sometimes it could be low risk but high value to the organization. And that would then give the estimated number of hours. And I broke it down by financial and IT because those are the two types of people I tended to have. That would tell me what my resource requirement was in order to give them the assurance they needed. And that then translated into a budget, all right? Because if I needed certain tools, or if I needed, as I did in many cases, co-sourcing requirements to do to certain specialized kind of topics, or to temporarily supplement the team, that would give me the requirement. So if I needed to do more, for example, when I was at Tosca, we were growing all the time, making acquisitions. It was simply a matter of adding the resource requirement, and that then would tell me what the required budget would be. That's the thing from, because I did some work on this on my blog. I wrote about this. I call this a zero-based budget, okay, which is basically what do I need to do, and therefore how much money do I need? A lot of people just take last year's budget and add an inflation factor. That to me is you either don't have enough money to do all the work, or you have too much money and you end up doing work that doesn't add value. So I prefer to actually define what I need to do and then go and get the budget to do it. Now, there was one time at Tosco in like the third or fourth year where we were having the oil industry, the market was depressed, and the CFO said everybody should have a cut. And he was good. He was possibly the best CFO that I worked with. He didn't say everybody needs to cut by the same 10 or 15%. He said, this is what the goal is for the company as a whole. And I need you to see what you can do to contribute to that and justify not cutting as much as that. So the fact that I had this, and I was able to say, if I cut 10% or 15%, these are the audits I won't be able to do. And the CFO and the audit committee looked at that and said, okay, you don't need to cut that much. just have some kind of minor cut, like delaying hiring, and you're still going to be able to do this level of audits, maybe trim some of those lower, one or two of those lower level audits. And so that to me has worked. And frankly, that's the way I think all of us should do. A budget should be, tell me what you need in order to do your job. Not last year plus or minus 5%.
Right. Perfect. All right. I had this, I pulled this straight from, I think it's your most recent. I know it's been with the past couple of weeks, but you said from your blog, we want to build an audit plan that focuses on what matters most to the achievement of enterprise objectives. Some call this objective-based auditing, but I prefer enterprise risk-based auditing. With that said, how do you put that together? Like if we collectively just called it a risk assessment, how do you actually build that out?
Well, of course, I wrote a whole book about that, Auditing That Matters.
Yeah, that's the go-to for me. That's I've told you this. I told somebody this last week, so it's even more top of mind. On my Kindle, I can highlight whatever I want to on there. That book has more highlights in it than anything on my Kindle. Not anything audit related. I mean, in general, any book I've ever read on my Kindle in the past, 10, 15 years, that one has the most highlights. And so actually there was one recommendation I would make to folks. It's either stop listening to right now to this and go just start reading that book, or maybe shortly after read it. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, thank you. So I think it comes back down to what is my focus? Why am I here? Why am I employed? And it's to provide that assurance on the issues that matter to the top management and to the board. And that means that I need to be thinking about, well, what does matter to them? What does matter to them are typically stated in their objectives. Maybe there's their mission over time, and then it's their objectives or strategies for achieving that mission over time. So I start with that and say, then, well, what could go wrong and what needs to go right in terms of achieving those objectives? And where can I add some value in providing assurance related to those risks and opportunities? So that's really the risk assessment. In the blog I made a comment. It's not, I don't like the term objective risk-based auditing, because you're not really auditing the likelihood of achieving the objective directly. You're auditing the controls over the more important risks. But it does mean understanding what are those risks. And there's a whole level of work that needs to be done in figuring that out, because it's not quite so simple as taking the management team's list of top risks. You got to dive more into, well, where are the controls over those risks, and how do I then build a plan to do it?
When you would see those objectives, that they were formally written out, objective 1, 2, 3, 4, did you often or ever, or once you got in to actually do the work around those, did you go, I mean, I know you have this written down as the objective, but based on what you're doing, your work that you're doing doesn't reflect you trying to meet this objective. Was that common? Did you see that a lot? Because it's super, and this is why I'm asking, it's super easy to go, and this is something I learned from you years and years ago, audit against strategic objectives and help the, organization. But I know a lot of times, even if it's a vision or a mission, and maybe that's all we have to go off of. I mean, I've been in those, large companies, and it's written on the elevators and there's posters, and you kind of walk by and go, yeah, cool. I don't feel that at all in what I do in my day to day. And so I just don't know, a lot of times I feel like people can go, yeah, but those aren't, real. And so that's kind of where the question's coming from, which makes it difficult, obviously. All right, now I'm done.
There are some formal objectives. There are also some objectives which are assumed but not stated. For example, to always be in compliance with applicable laws or regulations, to have a safe environment for employees. Those are clearly objectives, but they're not necessarily so stated. If you have a risk appetite statement, you actually will probably find some additional information there on what they consider to be important. You can also just sit down and talk to members of the board and top management to find out what they consider is important. But there's another side to this, which I think is just as important, and that is making sure you are not auditing what is not important. Because audit plans are full of projects, auditing controls, where if everything went wrong, it wouldn't matter to the CEO. And they're auditing, they're spending scarce resources on that, and not auditing some of the things that would matter to the CEO. But the auditor says, well, I'm not equipped, I'm not experienced, that's not something that we do. But that shouldn't stop us. We should use our imagination to figure that out and learn to audit what matters to the organization and build that into the plan. And sometimes it's advisory work, sometimes it's assurance work, but we need to be focused on just what matters to them. And that comes back down to, again, the same thing with where we spend a lot of time putting things in an audit report, which we may say is high risk, but they don't really matter to the CEO. But there's a serious issue here, Trent, which I find, and it's sort of in line with what you were saying, I find probably the great majority of companies fail to do. You have the corporate objectives, but then everybody else has objectives, right? But do those objectives tell that person what they need to do for the organization to succeed? As you probably know, I was a vice president in the IT world for a number of years, and I had information security and a whole bunch of other things that I was responsible for. And this was with the bank, and the human resources department came out with instructions on how to write your performance objectives. These are what I was going to be measured against. This is what I was what was going to determine whether I got a budget, a bonus, and how much that bonus was going to be. And I was told to think about what I felt was important. I was not told to go and ask my manager what he felt was important for his success for me to do. He wasn't asked what he had to do as a CIO to help the organization succeed. There was no what I call cascading down of objectives to make sure that everybody is working towards the same goals. And therefore you find that people are doing things which don't matter. I have this situation. This is a horrible story. So I apologize to everybody. And you may want to shut your ears because it's may be damaging to your auditor's health. But I was with this company, Selectron, and they purchased a highly profitable, high growth call center company in Massachusetts that had operations not only there, but also in Europe, and was in the process of building another one in Eastern Europe, which is going to be low cost. So they were doing a lot of things. They purchased this and assigned responsibility for it to an existing senior vice president. They then allowed the current membership, the previous membership, the CEO, CFO, COO, to leave the company. But the senior vice president, the existing senior vice president of the company, never had his objectives changed to include operating that new unit. And I told to him, as this business unit started to fail, because he was lacking leadership, they had abandoned the opening of the Eastern European center. They had seen a host of valuable employees leave because there's no leadership, no morale. And I asked him, when's the last time he went out there? And he said he went out there as part of the acquisition, due diligence. But he wasn't going back out there because his goals and his objectives were based upon his Selectron achievements and nothing at all about this one. So there has to be an alignment for everybody in terms of what they are doing. Does it define what is necessary for the organization to achieve its objectives? Going back up the ladder. And that's what leads to people doing things which don't matter. And we as auditors need to think about, okay, I'm not sure this is a risk or reality. What are we going to do? What are we going to do about it? And obviously I had conversations with more senior management and the board about it. But that I think is an issue that a lot of auditors don't see, is people doing things that don't matter. And therefore, maybe we should ask them to think about whether there's a need, there's a return on the investment of time and energy and resources on that particular topic, of that particular task. We can also think about where they can actually be working at cross purposes, which can make it more difficult. So again, at Selectron, we had this situation where each region had a lot of autonomy. US, North Americas, Asia, they had a lot of autonomy, and they refused to use the same ERP system. And so that was actually bringing down the achievement of objectives for the whole company. That's the sort of thing that I think, yes, we need to be very much aware of, structural or people issues that threaten the success of the organization.
All right. And for the people who did cover their ears, you can uncover them now. I'm glad you said cover your ears instead of like mute it or something like that, or just stop listening like I suggested earlier.
It's a scary story.
Yeah.
Maybe in time for Halloween.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, it will be. Yeah, we can make that work. All right. So with all of your body of knowledge, the books you've written, everything else you've kind of done for internal audit, is there anything, as we kind of wrap up, is there anything that you want to leave the audience with of this is what we need to be doing better?
We need to be thinking.
When you say that, I usually don't interrupt. When I usually give somebody the last word and I just go, whatever you want to say, you say it, that's fine. How though? I mean, what do you mean? Do you mean take time, take 30 minutes a day? Like, again, trying to figure out a process here and tease some of that out. How?
What I mean by that, Trent, is yes, you can do that and certainly do that. And unfortunately, I tend to do my thinking in my dreams sometimes, which is quite disconcerting. We tend to do what we won't allow our customers in management to do. If we ask them why they're doing something, and they say, we're told to do it. We've always done it that way. It's in the book. We won't accept that, right? There has to be a good reason. But yet, auditors are doing things the way they have been doing them without really thinking about, is this the best way to do something? I ran, and I'm sure you and many others listening have seen this, where you ask somebody, why are they doing it? They say, well, because the auditors told me to do it. And yet, we are doing things because the IIA tells us to do it. We are doing things because the IIA standards make us do it. We are doing things because it was done that way last year. I have seen so many situations where that is not how we can best add value to the organization. That is not how we can extend our thinking. We need to think. We need to use our imagination. We need to listen, especially. And I've got so many stories about auditors who failed to listen and as a result missed a serious issue that was going on in the area where they were supposed to be auditing. They just went through their checklist and did the same audits as last year. Even a former senior manager with E&Y fell into this trap and just went through what they considered to be a procurement audit program without spending time to go out and talk to and listen to and think about what they're hearing and what they're saying. The greatest tools for any auditor are their ears. What are they hearing? Their eyes. What do they see? Sometimes you can see issues in morale. You can see it in people's faces. You can see it in how they rush to leave. Or you can see it in how they stay behind in their dedication to their work. And then you've got the space in between, where you're actually thinking about what it is you've observed, what you've heard. What does this mean? One of my favorite slides, which I'm going to use this week in a presentation I'm doing in Des Moines, Iowa, talks about the time when I left my office and saw one of my team members with his head down on the desk. And my first thought was, is he okay? Is he sick? And I went up to him and I know other people's first thought was that guy's sloping off. We need to fire him because he's not being diligent. But no. I was concerned about it because I knew he was professional. So I went up to him and said, Michael, are you okay? And he turned and looked up at me and said, yeah, I'm just thinking about what I've just heard. Because he was actually reflecting on it in terms of, what does this mean in terms of the business? What does this mean in terms of, are they doing the right thing the right way? Are they missing an opportunity? Is there some way that I can think of that would help them do things better, faster, more effectively, more efficiently? And I think that we need to sometimes Come back from a meeting, shut the door, and think.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Audit Podcast. Whatever platform you're listening on right now, I'm sure there's a subscribe button somewhere, so please hit the subscribe button there. If you're listening through iTunes or Spotify, feel free to go give us that 5-star rating. It only took me about 16 seconds to give myself a 5-star review, and it really helps to get future guests to come on the show, so we'd really appreciate that. Lastly, be sure to check out the show notes and follow us on all our social media channels on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on TikTok. Also, if interested, please sign up for our weekly newsletter from the Audit Podcast. Thank you all. Have a great one.